Armadillos. Their names mean little armored ones in Spanish. They are familiar to many of us who live in the southern part of the United States, and some of them, like the three-banded armadillo here, can roll up completely into a tight ball. The most widespread armadillo is this one here, the nine-banded armadillo. It is found all the way from Kansas down to Argentina. Armadillos are mainly nocturnal, sleeping in their deep burrows during the day and coming out at night. Consequently, they have relatively poor eyesight and are instead focused on smelling and tasting their food, which they dig up with their powerful front claws. Armadillos are famous for their reaction when startled, jumping straight up and then hitting the ground running. This works well for most predators, but unfortunately it means they're often hit by cars when they jump straight up into the car itself. With their powerful claws, they can dig down to find almost any food item, and their sensitive noses sniff out their prey. In the tropics, they eat mostly ants and termites, and have a long sticky tongue with fairly simple teeth to consume these types of prey items. But outside the tropics, where ants and termites are less common, they eat a wide variety of worms and insects and grubs and just about anything that is edible. As their name implies, their bodies are covered with flexible armor. Some can roll up tightly into a ball that most predators cannot penetrate, but this kind of armadillo, the nine-banded armadillo, relies mostly on burrowing into deep holes for shelter and protection. When they are burrowing, they can hold their breath for up to 6 minutes, and this proves useful when they have to cross a body of water. Armadillos can hold their breath underwater, if necessary, and walk along the bottom of a river, or they can use conventional swimming methods where they inflate their bodies with air in their stomachs and make themselves buoyant enough to cross almost any medium or large-sized body of water. Armadillos have many other unusual characteristics. The fertilized egg cleaves into 4 separate embryos, which are quadruplets, so they're always born 4 at a time, genetically identical. Other than humans, armadillo is the only other mammal that can contract leprosy, which has proven very valuable in biomedical research. The armor of an armadillo is composed of pieces of dermal bone, which rise in their skin just above their skeleton. There are 9 genera and over a dozen species of armadillos. In addition to the 9-banded armadillo, there are things like the 6-banded armadillo or the hairy armadillo. To the smallest species, the pink fairy armadillo, which is barely 5 or 6 inches long. To the giant armadillo, which reaches up to 5 feet in length and is the heaviest and largest of all of the kinds of armadillos. Giant armadillos are now seriously threatened because they are so easily hunted in some parts of the world and also because of habitat destruction. They come out mainly at night and use their enormous powerful front limbs and claws to tear apart termite nests and ant burrows and feed on their insects. Armadillos are members of the order Xenarthra, which also includes sloths and anteaters. They belong to the suborder Cingulata, as opposed to the Pilosa, which includes the anteaters and sloths. Thanks to molecular analyses, the family tree of the armadillos is fairly well worked out, and even some fossil species have enough DNA in them to be included. Their fossil record can be traced all the way back to about 55 million years ago, when they diverged from the anteaters and the ground sloths. Dozens of extinct armadillos are known, like Peltophilus here, the horned armadillo, which is now extinct. Armadillo fossils were recovered from South America as early as 1814, but they were often mistaken for the bones of giant ground sloths. The first armadillo relative to be discovered by science was named by Richard Owen in 1839 and called Glyptodont. Owen had already made a name for himself working on giant ground sloths, but Glyptodont was a distinctly different animal, with its enormous shell and its peculiar teeth. In fact, the name Glyptodon means sculptured tooth and refers to these incredibly long, high-crowned prisms of dentin with no enamel on them. As more specimens were discovered and brought from South America, they were pride of many collections, like this Royal College of Surgeons exhibit. Unfortunately, these specimens were destroyed during World War II by German bombs. When complete specimens of Glyptodon were found, they were stranger than even Richard Owen could have imagined. In addition to the huge dome of bony armor, they had a ring of bone around their tails, making them into a rigid structure. Most of the time, only their huge, rigid shell is found as a fossil, but occasionally you get the complete skeleton underlies the shell, and then you have 4 massive limbs and a very rigid type of body, which is not suited to fast running. The largest of the Glyptodonts, like Dodecurus and Glyptodon itself, are the size of a smart car. Dodecurus is perhaps the most famous of all the Glyptodonts because it had this distinctive mace of spikes at the tip of its tail, which presumably used to fend off predators and also fight off others in their own species. The skulls of Glyptodonts are particularly weird. They're extremely tall and narrow and have a huge flange sticking off their cheekbones and very, very short nasal regions with eyes high on the top of the skull. Some paleontologists have argued that with their retracted nasal bones, they may have had a small trunk or proboscis. The shells of Glyptodonts have been found again and again, sometimes in large, complete specimens like these, buried underground. In addition to the Glyptodonts, there's a second group of armored armadillos that are now extinct, known as the Pompatheres. This is Holmesina, which is a typical Pompathere. It can be easily distinguished from Glyptodonts because around the middle of their shell, they have a band of rectangular or parallelogram-shaped plates that encircle the entire shell. A Glyptodont, by contrast, has plates which are made out of hexagons or polygons, but are closely packed together and fused solid, so they were not capable of any kind of flexion. So if you see rectangular plates in the middle of the body, you're looking at a Pompathere, not a Glyptodont. Both Pompatheres and Glyptodonts evolved in isolation in South America from 55 million years ago until 3.5 million years ago when they crossed the Panama Land Bridge or swam between some of the islands of the middle part of Central America. Both Pompatheres and Glyptodonts show up in North America. The best known of these is Glyptotherium texanum, which was a huge Glyptodont found primarily in Texas. With their thick, bony shells, Glyptodonts were probably impervious to almost any kinds of predators, because almost nothing could attack their shell or get to their underbelly when they squatted down. However, a specimen of a juvenile skull of Glyptodont shows puncture holes that are a perfect match for the saber-toothed cat. So in fact, they probably did have saber-tooths could feed on them when they were not fully armored. But Glyptodonts were impervious to most predators until the arrival of humans in South America around 30,000 years ago. There are a number of sites with butchered bones and carapaces of Glyptodonts, suggesting they were hunted. There are artifacts found in association with many of these butchered bones, and many even bear cut marks, showing they were clearly eaten by humans. However, Glyptodonts and humans overlapped in South America from about 30,000 years ago until about 8,000 years ago, so they're not killed off in a giant blitzkrieg, as one suggested. Instead, their extinction may seem to be a product of both gradual human predation and also climate change at the ACR, or Antarctic Climate Reversal. Whatever the cause of their demise, Glyptodonts, Pompatheres, and all their relatives were truly amazing animals, a classic example of how evolution can produce a tank from an animal like an armadillo.